History, a premier and paramount priority for progress of a people, arguably the single most important cultural property. It is the great unifier of all societies, from classical to contemporary. It is the shining beacon that restores vision to the blind. It is imperative that we create a unified effort to learn from it, that we may emulate its successes and prevent repeating its mistakes. For without history, we are without purpose. We are without identity. Welcome to the gray area, where we examine history in hindsight. January 24th, 41 AD, Claudius succeeds his nephew, Caligula, as Roman emperor after Caligula's assassination by officers of the Praetorian Guard. 1841, James W. Marshall discovered a gold nugget at Sutter's Mill in Northern California. The discovery would lead to the gold rush of 1849. 1908, Lieutenant General Robert Baden-Powell publishes Scouting for Boys as a manual for self-instruction in outdoor skills and self-improvement. The book will become the inspiration and the foundation for the Boy Scouts. 1916, conscription was introduced to Britain to provide bodies for World War I as young as 16. 1924, the Russian city of St. Petersburg was renamed Leningrad after Vladimir Lenin, who deposed Tsar Nicholas II during the Bolshevik Revolution. The name has since been changed back to St. Petersburg. 1941, British troops march into Abyssinia to assist the Italians, specifically to reinforce Benito Mussolini's occupation force during the Ethiopian invasion. 1980, the United States announced intentions to sell weapons to China. 1984, Apple Computer Incorporated unveils its first Macintosh personal computer. 1995, the prosecution gave its opening statement at the O.J. Simpson murder trial. 2002, John Walker Lind appeared in court for the first time concerning the charges that he conspired to kill Americans abroad and aided terrorist groups. Lind had been taken into custody by U.S. Marines in Afghanistan. John Walker grew up as a white middle-class American. 2003, U.S. Department of Homeland Security began operations under its first director, Tom Ridge. 2019, the U.S. government finally recognizes Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's president, and since then, he has been a U.S. sympathizer. But rewinding all the way back to 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down laws that denied welfare benefits to people who had resided in a state for less than a year. This maneuver was strictly to target states that discriminated against black families moving into industrial centers, in which the head of the household often had to migrate into said urban center for industrial jobs to find work. But the story begins when then Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz encouraged farmers to get big or get out, end quote, and to plant, quote, hedgerow to hedgerow. Over the course of the 20th century, farms had consolidated into larger, more capital-intensive operations, and subsidy policy under Butz encouraged these large farms at the expense of small and medium-sized family farms. which would eventually completely privatize agriculture in the United States. Overwhelmingly, the greatest affected group was the small black farmers who could not compete with the massive corporate agricultural machine that was fully backed by the federal government. The end result was agrarian black society was forced into industrial areas, as privatization of agriculture meant discrimination and state-forced removal of black farmers from farmland that was then turned over to the U.S. Soil Bank under the Soil Bank Act of 1956, and it would subsequently be redistributed to corporations who were given greater incentives to meet the demands of Earl Butz's agricultural initiative. But what happened was that small black farmers who could not compete were forced to find other work opportunities to support their families. And many southern states neighboring these affected farmland areas would, under states' rights, pass bills that would deny poor migrant families new to industrial centers welfare benefits. And many states even declared, under states' rights, that black men who were able-bodied and of working age could not qualify, where no such stipulation was made for white males. And 2, only the women were allowed to receive it under the condition that they themselves made under $3,000 a year, and 3, did not live with a man who was able-bodied and of working age, including her own sons. However, in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court would finally act and completely strike down all of those laws, removing and superseding states' rights. You see, history, much like time, waits for no man. It is ultimately up to us to decide whether we choose to make it or be the reason we repeat it. However, no matter what side of it that you stand on, you can only learn from it by looking at history in hindsight.